This is the Last Giddy Farmer podcast.
People in global south countries are now at the receiving ends of the heavy pollution that have been caused as a result of industrialization, capitalism in the global north countries.
But when we see weather pattern like we've never seen before, violent episode of storms, severe drought affecting our farming system, our food availability.
The question then arises, why is it that it is the global north countries that are actually responsible for bulk of the emissions causing the problem of climate change?
Thank you so much, Professor Fadairo, for joining us today. When I made this event, and posted the flyer, a lot of people are really anticipating this. They are very interested because the relevance, how it impacts our food system, our livelihood, our lives, ecosystem, and everything of such. So it's why, aside this, that we must have this discussion today, looking at, how climate change affects our every life. We must ensure a healthy food system and so other system that directly affects the climate, because our very existence, depends on it. So for people that, that might not be really familiar with you and your work, so I'm just going to quickly, if you permit me, do a short read of your profile so they are able to keep abreast with us. So Professor Olushola Fadairo is a community development expert with interest in sustainable rural development, agricultural extension, project management, evaluation, and policy issues in agriculture. So in recent years, he has provided consultancy services to World Bank assisted projects on process documentation study and beneficiary impact assessment of their micro projects in Nigeria, for USAID, markets too on maize, cassava grower out scheme in Oyo State, for IITA on his cassava maize value chain project. So academically also, he holds a bachelor degree in agriculture from the University of Ilorin, a master's and PhD in agricultural extension and rural development from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. So he was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cape Town, that is in South Africa, in 2016. So he's a fellow of United Nations University Education and Sustainable Development in Africa. We are talking about the UNO ESDA. In terms of work experience, he has a stint as program officer and later as a training manager with private establishment in Nigeria before joining the services of University of Ibadan in 2011 as a lecturer in the Department of Agricultural Extension and Rural Development. So recently, he's appointed as the Director of Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Sustainability at the Emmanuel Alayande University of Education, Oyo. He also coordinates the Professional Masters in Sustainable Integrated Development of Africa, at the UI Center for Sustainable Development. So he practices market gardening and enjoys traveling. He is also a member of Agricultural Extension Society of Nigeria, Rural Sociological Association of Nigeria, Society for Climate Action in Nigeria. That's what we are here today, right? And International Society for Development and Sustainability in Japan. So it's really a very impressive and rich profile here, I must really say. And without much ado, I'm going to dive into straight the event of the day. Welcome from Azerbaijan, Prof. So
Thank you so very much.
The highlight of the COP29 that caught my attention was your interview with a media station, and you lamented the double standard for climate finance between global north and global south countries. Like when we look at it, that despite Africa having the lowest GHG emissions and contribution to climate change, as we know, and sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, harboring countries at most risks of climate change. We are talking about Mozambique, Central African Republic countries. So they received just 2.7% of that total global climate finance, which is 500 billion today. It's such that these African countries, they generate the least of emissions. And when it comes to the total global finance, they receive one of the lowest. So I'm asking that, what implications do you see, with this kind of inequality and, gap in climate finance? Was there a motion raised at the COP29 to this? Thank you so much, sir.
Let me first and foremost start by thanking you for having me on this very important platform. And I'm proud of what you have been doing, and I'm happy to join this platform. And then also to discuss this very important issue, the issue about climate change and how it affects agriculture and food systems in Nigeria. As you have noted in your opening remarks, I just returned from Azerbaijan, where COP29 held. Of course, I think the event is still ongoing. It's going to probably end today and then wrap up tomorrow. And after then, people will begin to travel back to their various destinations. Yeah, I granted an interview where I spoke about a few issues, and one of those issues has to do with the double standards, with respect to climate finance flows from global north countries to global south countries. It is a well-established fact that African countries only contribute about 4%, 3.7%, if you approximate that, is just about 4% of the total global emissions. And that means that industrialized nations, which are referred to as global north countries, have been actually responsible for the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions that is giving us this problem of climate change today. Of course, climate change is not only caused by carbon dioxide emission. There are quite a number of other emissions that come from here and there, but the major issue is actually hinged on burning of fossil fuel, carbon dioxide emissions, which comes from industrial activities in global north countries. We have methane also, methane gases, and then a few other things like that that are responsible for climate change issue. And so there is this agreement. What actually informed the conference of parties, the COP, that we normally call COP every year, is the need for humanity to join effort together to fight against this problem of climate change because of its, deleterious effects on agriculture, on farming livelihoods, on people generally, and many other issues. And then there is an urgent need for us to work on that. So there is this concept of different, capability and then different contributions to the issue of climate change. It's called differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. What it just means that, of course, we all have joint responsibilities to fight against climate change, but we do have differences in terms of contributory effects, percentages to the global warming, and in terms of our capabilities. And therefore, this, phenomenon puts the bulk of the responsibility of championing adaptation in terms of funding on the global north countries that are mainly responsible for emission. It will now be the responsibility of the global south countries to access this fund to promote adaptation, because people in global south countries are now at the receiving ends of the heavy pollution that have been caused as a result of industrialization, capitalism in the global north countries. Now, the double standard came because over the years, there is a huge gap and difference between the funds allocated and the funds disbursed. I'll just give, a simple illustration. Let's say, for instance, a country A has been, allocated, $1 billion for adaptation. And then, unfortunately, the country A is unable to access beyond $200 million out of the $1 billion for adaptation. That's a huge gap between funds allocated and funds disbursed. Now, what is the reason for this huge gap? They say it is because of fiduciary standards. Fiduciary standards are standards set by these countries in their own understanding to promote transparency. And then because they feel that, okay, global north south countries, they have weak governance capacity. They have problems of poor transparency. And so we want to ensure that these funds are not just, thrown into their coffers and then they are siphoned and wasted as a result of, corruption and the rest. So there are what we call fiduciary standards. Unfortunately, fiduciary standards have hindered global south countries' ability to access these funds. Then the question then arises, why is it that it is the global north countries that are actually responsible for bulk of the emissions causing the problem of climate change, having agreed that they are supposed to set aside certain amounts of money to support adaptation in global south countries? Why is it then that it is these same global north countries that are actually dictating what conditions that you must meet before these funds can be accessed? And unfortunately, I also got opportunity to interview a few persons who informed me that in addition to the fiduciary standards, countries are made to hire consultants who will need to help them. And those consultants must also come from, these global north countries. Because they believe that, okay, these countries don't have the ability to understand deep technical issues that they need to know in order to make necessary applications and then submit certain documentations for this funding. So the requirement is that, okay, you hire a consultant who is going to help you, but this consultant will take, a huge chunk of the fund. So the issue of double standards arises. And then there's another issue when I go to the COM grant. In fact, you will see inscription in some places, grants and not loans. In other words, these funds that are meant to support adaptation in the global south countries are now being advanced by some, parties from the global north countries as loans. They now have certain conditionalities that present them as loans to countries and not as grants. So this happens to be, the crux of the matter, why this tension between the global south and the global north countries and the debate vis-a-vis, climate finance flows, and then issues of transparency, weak governance, fiduciary standards, and then the double standards. I think that, of course, the idea of weak governance structure in the global south countries, the idea about poor transparency, we cannot totally jettison them. Because in 2015, I did a study. I was at the University of Cape Town in 2015. I was funded by DFI, Department for International Development in the United Kingdom, and I had my postdoctoral, fellowship program at the University of Cape Town. Specifically, I was hosted at ACDI, African Climate and Development Initiative at UCT, and I worked with a professor of public law, Professor Richard Callam. Then, in that study, we were trying to answer the question, is the concern about corruption and hence fiduciary standards justified? So we used the REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation project, as a case study. And specifically, we looked at Nigeria as a study location. Now, in that study, really found out that indeed there were challenges at the local level, at the country level, with respect to what? Transparency, with respect to governance structure. But that is not enough to cause the huge gap between the funds allocated and the funds disbursed. Because even on the other side, within the jurisdiction of the global, north countries, why the issue of making recommendations, making stringent measures that it does appear as if these nations are not really willing to actually give that's the way it appear to a number of persons, party members from the African continent, that okay, they are just paying lip services to humanity's fight against climate change, lip services to setting aside trillions of dollars to support adaptation. What is the essence of money that are being voted that are unable to be assessed in developed countries and countries where adaptation is urgently needed to be implemented? These are the issues. So, the global north countries and the south countries need to have a review of the way forward. I participated at a plenary event. It was hosted by Climate Funds at this just concluded COP29. And then, of course, Adaptation Fund, representatives from Adaptation Fund came around to have, interactive session with members of the civil society organizations who are present. Civil society organizations from the global south countries. And then I was happy that I raised this issue. In fact, when I raised the issue, I actually spoke the mind of many of the CSOs, because after the event, all of them came to me to thank me. So, because I raised this issue of the need for climate funds, the fiduciary standards that countries are required to go through to assess this fund, the need for these fiduciary standards to be relooked into. If it is possible, these roadblocks mounted and making it difficult for countries to access this fund need to be downplayed. I am not saying that issues of transparency and accountability should be cast away totally. No. But political issues that surrounds the fiduciary standards should be relooked into. Then this idea of wanting global, let's say, organizations that are promoting adaptation at local levels in global south countries to hire consultants, saying that they don't have enough capacity. What kind of capacity do you think that it is required? These people know their terrain, they understand the needs of the people, the soft adaptation instrument that need to be deployed. And I think that that is what should be most important because of the urgency of adaptation, rather than, these serious procedures and documentation that actually has led to loss of lives. We are incurring every day losses and damages due to climate change impacts. And it is high time that, all parties need to get on board and be more serious. Transparency is good, but lives are being lost because we are playing politics with transparency and then fiduciary issues. These are the issues that, I address. In fact, there was a write-up, myself and a colleague from the United States of America, Fireball, that's the name of that colleague. We wrote a write-up. We captioned it as, COP29 because after following the Day 4 event, the Day 4 event incidentally had a theme that has to do with finance. So eventually, we needed to write a story around that finance issue, that portrays the tension between the global south and the global north country. We titled it COP24, a house of prayer or a den of thieves. That's, a short write-up is available online. And I posted it on my LinkedIn page for people to go and read up. You will have more insight about, these tensions and what is fueling these tensions. Of course, there are issues also that at the local level also, even at country level. When countries assess the funds, of course, there are issues that has to do with transparency in terms of transfer of the funds from the central government to the local levels too. It's not all about global south versus global north. Even within the country, at country levels, there is a need for a lot of loopholes to be blocked. Because at country levels, how do you account for a central government assessing adaptation fund, maybe to the tune of 10 billion? I just give that as an example, $10 billion to promote adaptation at local levels. But what is getting to the county levels means local government levels, because some other countries use the word county. But in our own country, I know that we use local government levels and community level. To the county level, what is getting to the county level from about, let's say, $10 billion that the central government has assessed is not up to $1 billion. So that means that the remaining has been consumed in what people will call operating costs or operational costs, overhead costs, while a paltry sum is actually, deployed for the real adaptation that's needed at local level. Now, this does not show that these countries are also serious. If a panelist actually gave this example, and it was a real example, what she experienced in the field in a particular country. I won't mention the name of the country. So, as we have the issues, the tension between the global south and the global north, we also have tensions even within at country levels that need serious urgent attention for addressing if we are indeed going to make significant progress in our march towards fighting climate change problem.
Thank you so much for that. That was really deep insight. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience listening to us are learning a lot. There's a lot of structural problems that impedes assessing the available fund for climate finance. There is disparity between what is being allocated and what is being disbursed for many issues. So it's like you've explained, if I'm right, there is the structural issue from the international landscape, whereby they see that the countries that are in need most of these funds have the technical capacity and also the governance to better put to use these funds, right? And following your later discussion, mention of in-house issues that we have also, not using the funds appropriately. We are talking about misallocation here, but irrespective of that, we are seeing the adverse effect of climate change, taking lives, taking livelihood. So we cannot say because these countries do not have technical capacity and fiduciary structures, we are not going to give them the funds needed, because at the end of the day it affects the whole globe here. So what you have proposed is actually very important, because we have tools of democracy, right? The non-governmental organizations, they have their structures, they are well connected with the most impacted areas, and people. We are talking about the vulnerable, the children, women, disabled, and elderly. They be a vehicle towards combating climate change. This is something that we must look out to. So I will just go on straight into the next question shortly, because what you have said shows a very deep politics here, and is connected to why people have this, sort of disbelief in climate change or fight against climate change. So that's one part of it. So I would like to ask you, to put it clear to people out there that feel that, climate change is a house, is not real. And I like to ask, is it real? Are we seeing the immediate effect of climate change, or there's going to be more, future instances of impact of climate change? That's in one aspect. And do you think that there's been a load of misinformation, propaganda, unnecessary hysteria about the so-called impact of climate change that is, pushing people to be very skeptical? What role do you think the media is responsible for here, and also the academia world?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. You see, when climate change issue came to the forefront of global discourse a few decades ago, not many people actually saw it as anything serious. Many people doubted the reality of the phenomenon called climate change. But over the years, as the impact began to stare us, in the face, people began to, understand and appreciate the reality of climate change. Of course, that's not to say that even till today, there are still a few here and there who still doubt or who still attribute the events happening to maybe some strange things. Some say it's the act of God. There are people like that. But, I have looked at several studies that have been done, particularly in our own climate. I've seen progression over the years. I've seen improvement in terms of awareness of people about the phenomenon called climate change. Of course, you don't need to go far. Even in our own environment, in our own context, we know that there was a time that the planting calendar, what we know as seasonal calendar, was, you can actually go and sleep and follow the planting calendar without having any problem of, incurring any loss from your crop, from your animals, that you rear in your farm. But now, you cannot take such a risk. In those years, we used to know that, okay, planting season starts at a particular month because rain will start at this time. Rain will have August break. We used to have August break. But now we don't even have anything that is stable called August break. So there's distortion of the farming calendar as a result of what? Problem of, unpredictable weather and climates. Rainfall pattern is unpredictable. Now, there's the phenomenon of global warming, that the earth is becoming more, is becoming warmer every now and then as a result of carbon dioxide emission. When carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere and it accumulates, what it does is that it absorbs the heat from the earth's surface and at a certain time radiates it back to the earth, making the earth to be warmer. Scientists have proved beyond doubt that climate change is real. They are not caused by, they are not acts of God. But of course, there are quite a number of persons here and there who are still living in denial of this reality. There is a need for everyone to be involved in actually taking this information to them. Because this is a matter that affects not just now, it's a matter that affects the future. If the climate is such warm, is as this warm now, if we don't do anything to stem the tide, I am afraid that we are going to lose more biodiversity. Already now we are talking of the conservation of biodiversity because of animals are going into extinct, because of what? The river, the ocean are shrinking. We're having problem of, lack of access to adequate water for domestic use and for agricultural purposes. We are talking of rainfall pattern that is getting distorted and making, farming calendar unpredictable. And then farmers are incurring heavy losses as a result. Even in our climate, agriculture is mainly dependent on rainfall. Of course, there is a need for farmers to begin to think of climate smart farming. They cannot do it alone. Every stakeholders need to rally around them. Now, but to address your major issue, your major question, which has to do with what roles do we have to play, all of us, whether you are in the academia, the researchers, yes, the government, the media, including the religious centers. Because religious centers, they play key roles. Most religious centers have contributed to misinforming people by asking them to pray that climate change, what is happening. Of course, they won't say climate change. They tell you because there's no rain, God is punishing the people. Now, they need to be well informed because they got a number of followers. And when they teach followers this heresy, okay, and that is actually contributing to the disbelief in the concept and the phenomenon of climate change, because some of them hold their religious leaders in very high esteem. So religious leaders need to be taught. A number of them who are still attributing it to the act of God. We know that God exists, but you see, this is as a result of anthropogenic activities. These are human-induced, activities that we have caused by our appetites, by our irresponsible consumption and use of resources. And it is not going to be sustainable if we continue that way. And that is why we have a lot of, we have the Kyoto, protocol. We have, target to ensure that by 2050, we achieve net zero. That is to say that global emission, and then the amount of carbon that is being removed from the atmosphere, they equal. So at net zero, that means that the amount of carbon that's being released or that's available in the atmosphere, the amount of carbon that we are removing equals. And then we also have another agenda to ensure that year by year, we keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. In fact, there are even targets to ensure that we even reduce them to about 1.5 degrees Celsius. We cannot achieve this if we still have quite a number of persons who are still living in disbelief. So media have got to pass the right information. In fact, I expect that a lot of media centers should be present at COP. They should have representatives, not just to come and then cover events alone. We should have media centers playing key roles, participating actively and getting the right information, especially the radio stations. I have seen a number of TV stations, for instance, Arise TV correspondents at Azerbaijan. But I didn't meet anyone who came from any radio station. And you know that a bulk of people in Nigeria listen to radio. Go and look at statistics, go and look at research. Many people people do listen more to radio, especially people in the rural environment, in communities where we still have large number of persons who are still not in terms with the reality of climate change. And so radio stations have got serious roles to play. Researchers have got roles to play. People like me in the academia, we need to do more studies in rural environments to unravel, the situation, to do situation analysis, contextual analysis about what is affecting people's understanding and belief so that there can be appropriate intervention. Because if you don't know their current state, their present milieu, how do we understand how to help them out of this, situation? So research has got responsibilities to play. Research in particular, beyond finding out what is the state of things and then making appropriate recommendation on expected intervention or on the right intervention, we also have roles to play in helping people in adaptation. We'll talk about that if there are other questions that address adaptation. But, I'm just talking about what roles do each of these stakeholders have got to play in terms of, giving orientation and raising awareness of people about this climate change phenomenon. It is very important, and there is an urgent need to do this because, look, if you look at the trend, I looked at the trend recently, it shows that, as this climate change issue gets heightened, we have more farmers who are being affected. Especially, that in our own climate, bulk of the food that we eat, comes from small-scale producers, small-scale farmers. And these small-scale farmers have poor resilience capacity, and then the adaptation ability is very low, and that portends a lot of danger for the future. There is projection that the global population by 2050 will hit about 10 to 11 billion, and you see a sizable proportion of this 10 to 11 billion will come from Africa. And if they come from Africa, you can imagine what proportion of it will come from Nigeria, because Nigeria, as we pride ourselves as the giant of Africa. We're not just giant, we are giant in terms of population. And that means that, we've got huge population. And if we continue in this traditional style of farming and not, adopting climate smart farming patterns and the rest. Even now that we are doing this traditional system, of farming and the rest, we are unable to feed our population. Our self-sufficiency ratio in terms of food production is low. That means there's more danger if, these climate trends becomes heightened and population keeps growing. That means that food security will be a challenge. There will be a great problem of food insecurity in the land. It's not only about Nigeria, but the whole of Africa. So, you see, it is high time that everybody, get involved in this campaign, whether you are from the religious, cycle. Incidentally, my experience at Azerbaijan shows that a lot of organizations, for instance, most churches, they do in these global north countries, they do have department of environment. In fact, most of those organizations sponsored people to come to COP. But I have not seen much from our own end here, especially from a few African countries. So churches or religious centers should not just be concerned about heaven alone. Of course, you must live on earth and live a fulfilled life before you can talk of heaven. You must enjoy your life here on earth. And then it is our collective responsibility to ensure that we bequeath to our generation an environment, a climate that is worth living, that will not jeopardize their chances of living a good life. So that means that we also need to be committed as a church, as a mosque, religious centers, as private organizations, and then as more private organizations need to come on board. They need to allocate funds in terms of CSR to help adaptation, to support, public awareness. There must be mass mobilization and awareness campaign so that people can understand the reality about climate change. And then it is not difficult to explain to people because these are things that they can see themselves. It's only that many of these things have been tied to some wrong belief, a kind of misinformation that tells them, okay, it is happening because of this and not really because of climate change. So they need to learn appropriately that these things are anthropogenic activities. They are caused by our irresponsible consumption and behavior, and the trend will heighten if we don't go on a reverse gear. And then we need to believe that this is not the act of God in the first instance, so that we'll be able to be in a good frame of mind to begin to adopt behavioral change that is necessary for us to move forward as a people.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. It's really enlightening, and I'm sure that people listening to us are taking notes of solid points that you've been dishing for us, this evening. And I must say, as for me, I really do understand that climate change is real. I know the arguments out there against climate change and all that, but when we see weather pattern like we've never seen before, violent episode of storms, severe drought affecting our farming system, our food availability, then we must take a step backward and actually assess the situation that this is something new and this is something that is never happening before. It's not happening. I really do believe that, the media and, our opinion leaders, they have a very solid role to play in responsible journalism, sensitization of people. And I really do believe that even the opinion leaders, if we readily listen to them, our pastors, our imams, they have this such influence on us. We can actually reverse that information dissemination process and effecting behavioral change, whereby rather than misleading people, then they can inform people about, the climate change and how real it is and why we must take actions. Yet, if we actually understand how climate change is real, then we can understand how our activities actually trying to, bring up this situation. Like you've said, the anthropogenic forces. You don't have to be praying to God when the result that we are seeing are from our own, activities. So I'm going to move on to the next question now. We've been talking about, Africa, talking about climate change and the situation, for Africa itself, to make sense of whether we are going to see any realistic address with climate change in the next decade, looking at the growth trends that we've been seeing from some key industries. Now, when we look at, the broader economy, you look at the global smartphone market, it would reach about $500 billion next year. It's growing by 3.77% yearly, averagely, from it's going to grow at that rate from 2023 to 2029. So we are seeing similar case for AI, artificial intelligence, and other tech applications requiring the use of, batteries and semiconductors, even for green energies, where we're talking about electric cars. So bulk of these inputs are being mined in countries like Congo. We already know that Congo, the DRC, is one of most risks at the effect of climate change are being affected the most here. And, I was just looking at this, that as the world populations, as it grows, we have more hungry people. And Africa, like you said, is the hub of food production for the world. My question thus is that, are we going to be seeing a realistic mitigation to climate change, in the following decade with these growth projections and to hazardous exploitation as it is? I was thinking that, was this a consideration at the COP29? What do you think should be done, or the focus is not at COP29? What do you recommend to make COP29's cause more effective and environmental justice served? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so very much. That's a very important question, because honestly, it's a question that is on the heart of almost everybody that attends COP. I remember I participated in an activity at the Singaporean pavilion at this COP29. And that activity, eventually we had to engage in, group discussions, and we are giving some questions to ponder on. One of the questions borders on our faith in the current targets by COP to achieve net zero by 2050. Whether is it possible? Do we think that this is real, given a number of factors? You have just, give us some factors, you have given us some factors now. Adaptation is not going as planned in most Saharan African countries. Do you think that if this trend continue, do you think we are on the right trajectory, we're on the right path towards achieving net zero by 2050? These are questions that almost everyone is asking. And it's a very genuine question, because why it is genuine is because we see a lot of politics going on. I must tell you that this just concluded COP29. We had more delegates from fossil producing countries than countries that has nothing to do with even burning of fossil and production of fossil. That's to tell you a political angle to this. Of course, that has an implication. If we have more delegates from such countries, you know what their interest will likely be. And then when issues get to the negotiation table, they are probably going to have a dominant voice. And that means that the voices of others will likely be subservient. Democratic principles, majority will have their way. And so, if you look at all those issues, the complexity, the political landscape that surrounds all this stuff, you are not going to be blamed for asking that question, that is this a reality? Are we sure that we can achieve net zero? Are we sure that we can actually win the battle against climate change? Well, my answer will be that I think these targets are achievable, in all honesty. I think these targets are achievable, but whether they can be met within the time frame that have been specified in our framework. When I say our framework, I mean the COP, is another ballgame. I don't know. So by 2050, the targets are realizable. It is possible that sometimes in the future, if we do the needful, if we successfully transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy, if we implement adequate adaptation in communities where there are gaps, if we take care of the issues of loss and damage, if we address all these pertinent issues, we will definitely achieve a net zero. But whether in 2050 or beyond 2050, I am not sure about that. In fact, to establish the worry, to let you know that many other parties are actually concerned in this same way. Some called at this just concluded COP29. We got calls. I heard of calls from some quarters, from some party, who called on the organizers, who called on the parties to relook into the target time frame and probably see a way of extending it, maybe beyond 2050, maybe 10 to 15 years, add more 10 to 15 years. Some persons who are concerned, okay, why can't we push it, upward to make it like 2060 or maybe 2065? So I think time frame is the issue. Not only time frame. What should we do? To answer the question, you pose the question, say, what should COP do? You have asked the question that, was this issue discussed? And I've answered it that, yes, of course, because many people expressed worry about the chances of meeting this target within the time frame set. So it was discussed. People came up with issues, questions in that respect. And that was why, there were considerations or there were questions from some quarters to see the possibility of actually extending the time frame. Now, what should COP do? There's a need to reduce political influence surrounding COP. I told you earlier that we had more participants from fossil fuel producing countries than other countries. And as a matter of fact, the last three COPs, thereabout, were actually held or hosted in countries that had something to do with production of fossil. So some are reading some political moves to it. Some are asking some questions, and then they are thinking that this has gotten to do one way or the other with politics. As a matter of, somebody even confided in me, somebody I met who is a friend, who actually is one of the advisors, African negotiators at COP, told me that, look, there is a lot of politics involved in this whole process. Of course, she told me that that's normal, that politics is normal. You've got to understand the landscape. You've got to know how to do it, how to play it. That if you don't, play the politics, then you get nothing. But I think that, of course, we are all political beings because we are social beings in the first instance. But I think that politics should be kept at the lowest minimum in this matter, because we need to give more preference to the major issues that concerns all of us. That's one of the things that I think COP should do. The next thing, I was at another pavilion where a panelist was discussing and was telling us it is possible to transition successfully from fossil to renewable energy, because governments in many countries have been asking the question, where is the money? People are coming up with bills, with requirements every year. For instance, civil society organization came out with a bill, we require also billions of dollars for adaptation. And then if you accumulate all this money, for instance, COP is looking that by 2030, they are looking at raising, 1 trillion, investing 1 trillion. And by 2025, 1.5 trillion. As of this COP, that's what, the estimates they are looking at. $1 trillion by 2030, $1.5 trillion by 2035. And governments of some countries are saying, where is this money? Where can we get this money? But somebody said, this money is possible, we can get it. He said, if every country, you cut the subsidy on fossil, and he gave the statistics to show that if every country cuts the subsidies on fossil and invests that same cost in renewable energy, we will successfully transition from fossil, combustion to renewable energy. And then, the implication of that on our climate, because fossil has done a lot of that, is a major problem. It's a major pollutant to our environment. Now, I think that COP should take a more pragmatic measures to engaging the parties. Parties do come with what we call nationally determined contributions framework, that what they are going to do, to ensure that they meet up, they contribute towards reducing carbon emission and the rest. But I think that this should go beyond paperwork now. The parties should be more pragmatic, should be more definitive, and then should be more serious with these NDCs, national determined contributions. And then let them reflect in their, plans, how they want to transition from fossil to renewable energy, specifically cutting subsidies on fossils and reinvesting. That is what I think that Nigeria did not do. Nigeria removed subsidies on fossil, but you see, you are not going to encourage adaptation or encourage transition, successful transition, if that same amount is not invested or reinvested into renewable energy to promote renewable energy. Now, we are encouraging people, go on CNG, go and change your vehicle to be CNG compliant, and you know how much it's going to cost you to change, to CNG. So we haven't seen much uptake of that kind of innovation or idea. But if these funds that are removed from fossil have been reinvested in any renewable energy, in clean transport system, I tell you, we will see a lot of impact. We will see wide-scale adoption. And then we will see impact in the next few years, extent as we go to contribute to our own nationally determined contributions as a nation. Now, I'm saying that COP, and indeed all parties, should be more, pragmatic in their approach and should be more sincere, should be more committed, genuinely, towards cutting fossils. And I tell you, it's possible. Climate funds should, for now, be considered as grants and not loans. Well, there are insinuations from some quarters that, okay, because of course, there wouldn't have been need for those captions, that kind of protest that I saw on COP grants and not loans. Of course, that speaks volume of tension, and then the feasibility and the possibility of some, arising from some quarters, advancing these, climate finance as loans to some countries, and not as, a grant. It should be as grants. Of course, that does not mean that African countries should also sit, or global South countries should become. But although I also encourage global South countries to begin to look inward for measures to sustain adaptation activities after some years when the funds may not come as before. In terms, funds can get reduced because these funds are not supposed to be forever. You remember the case with the ADP structure. We had World Bank funding to actually help ADP to test some technologies and approaches towards, facilitating extension services in Nigeria. And then after the withdrawal of the funding, what happened to ADP? Now, we should not be donor dependent as countries or as a region. We must also ensure that, but for now, the global North countries have the responsibility to ensure that this climate finance comes to countries, especially countries that are in need for serious and urgent adaptation, come to these countries as grant and not as loan. But at the same time, we need to also tell our governments in various countries that they need to begin to think of self-initiative, self-funding initiative to continue from wherever this climate finance stops so that there can be sustainability of the process. I think these are the things that as COP, we need to discuss. Of course, the number of agenda comes on COP every now and then. There is almost, anything that can describe as gap that is left out at each COP, because they talk about national determined contributions, they talk about fossil, they talk about transition, to renewable energy, they talk about adaptation, they talk about technology transfer, and many of all those things. And in fact, for the whole of the 2 weeks, every day is actually designed, is actually committed to a particular thematic area. A particular day may be for finance and adaptation. A particular day may be for loss and damage. A particular day may be for, to discuss fossil and all those stuff. So every of these issues are actually giving priority attention at each year that the COP event is held. The thing is just that political issues must be downplayed. There's a need for more sincerity and then genuine commitment to fighting climate change so that everybody can be on the same page. If we do this, we'll be on the right track towards achieving net zero. But as I said earlier, The question of 2050, I don't want to really talk much about that, whether it's achievable within that time frame or not. I am not too optimistic about that time frame, but I know that it is realizable to achieve net zero. But my worry is the time frame. So I join other countries parties who are actually calling for a shift, for a reconsideration of that time frame. I joined, I support, I lend my voice to those voices to ask for, an extension of that time frame so that we can give more time for adaptation. We can give more time for local communities also, and then at country levels to strengthen their strategies, and then give more time for researchers to evolve with more that can help local adaptations. We are not doing much in Nigeria. I was at Malaysian Pavilion and I listened to one presentation where somebody came up with a technology, forgotten what is a caption on that technology. In fact, I had discussions with him, and I was thinking that I can link him up with some, entrepreneurs, agricultural entrepreneurs, and in Nigeria, who can partner with him to extend that technology to Nigeria. That technology is being deployed currently in Asia, in Malaysia. The technology is to help productivity. I've forgotten the name of that, technology, but it's based on research, and then it's based on the need to help farmers to adapt to climate change impact. So it has got a lot of advantages, to boost crop resilience to drought, and then help crop to produce very well, to maintain good yield, even in the face of what climate change, effects. And very fantastic. It was demonstrated. And then I think that such technologies, we need researchers in our own climes also to be more innovative and to engage in this kind of adaptive research work that can help, to profile solutions to our own local problems that can, bring about, our own ingenuity in terms of the solutions we are deploying to, adapt better to climate change phenomena. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's really powerful. So my next question will go in line with what you were discussing about. You started from the international level, what we should be doing at international level, then stem to local level, Nigeria. You talk about subsidy, the redirecting of subsidy removal to green energy, which is we've taken such initiative here in Nigeria, but we are not seeing the immediate impacts here. So I want to ask you this question. So now looking at some of the adverse effects that we've seen with climate change in Nigeria, especially in the north, northeastern Nigeria, where we've seen climate change, worsening conflict, worsening poverty and hunger statistics. What are some of the immediate and long-term strategies that we should be establishing to actually cushion these shocks, to push back these shocks? We might be saying that we have corrupt leadership and all that, but like you've mentioned previously, at the international level, just because we don't have the technical capacity doesn't mean that we are going to take a step back and leave the changing climate to actually ravage the whole environment and people's life here. So we are looking at, irrespective of that, looking at third-party players, private party players, and the NGOs in place. What are some of the immediate strategies and long-term strategies that we can put in place that will help us solve some of these recurring issues? But before you go on to that, I just want to quickly mention that we'll be having commentary, especially from Damilola Olajuputu. So she's saying that is interesting discourse so far and profound insight, from you, that the political landscape has significant influence on achieving the climate goals, and yes, power dynamics in decision making goes a long way in achieving a net zero, within the stipulated time frame. And she's also saying that an extension of the time frame would allow for more time to achieve, local adaptation to climate change impact. I really do go in line with that as well. Is what I've previously talk about as well. So I will leave the floor now for you to address the next question. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I want to thank Damilola. Damilola is from the United States of America. And then Damilola, she's been in the forefront of giving voice to rural people in Nigeria. She founded the Rural Nurture Initiative in Nigeria, an NGO that had been helping rural communities to adapt to climate change impacts. I could recall that NGO at some times ago visited a rural community to help them, to have access to water. And she's done fantastically well in promoting sustainability and sustainable development issues. Her focus is on rural communities in Nigeria. And she's currently in the US. And I'm happy that she's able to join this conversation. And then I totally agree with her submission. Of course, that's a submission in the last, my response to your last question. That, of course, more time is actually needed. Now, talking about what we should be doing as a country, because we all know that climate change is real, and then our farmers are actually facing a lot of challenges arising from climate change. And then it is not just on their livelihoods, apart from threatening their livelihoods, even threatening their survival, because anything that affects your household economy is a threat to your survival. And then, for all of us, we are facing the threats to food security, because our self-sufficiency ratio in food production is nothing to write home about. And our population is growing. So that means that there is an urgent need to act. And when is the time to act? It is now. There are quite a number of things that we need to do. And then these responsibilities does not lie within the purview of the government alone. Of course, the governments have a lion's share of responsibilities, particularly in terms of, the framework, policy support to ensure subsidies, insurance, and access to global markets, for affected farmers, issues of policy, insurance policy. What is the, rate of insurance uptake among our farmers, particularly when you talk of small-scale producers? In fact, many of them are not interested in insurance, and it's understandable. It is because, of course, insurance should be one of the key strategies for adaptation, but because there is, number one, low awareness of the prospects of insurance, and then because of their economic status. But government can help if government comes up with the right framework. There are people that can be contacted in Nigeria, form a think tank to suggest to government how farmers can be helped through favorable insurance policy. Then subsidies. Government has been trying to do this, but I have a lot of information about how government subsidies to farmers are not really hitting the right targets. But unfortunately, sometimes our policy actors don't want to listen. They don't want to listen because I don't know why they don't want to listen. We have policies that actually encourage subsidy on fertilizers. Of course, that's chemical anyway. But I can tell you that this fertilizer is not getting to the real farmers. There are fertilizers that are allocated to southwestern part of Nigeria. They take stock of them and they move them into the store. The same lorries that brings them in are the same lorries that evacuate them and they take them somewhere else in the night. Well, these are obvious things. I mean, government should go and find, go and fact check this, investigate this. So these fertilizers eventually, maybe they are exported outside of Nigeria, taken to neighboring African countries, I don't know, or taken away from, states where they are supposed to be used to other states to go and add to the quantity that has been already allocated to farmers in other states. Well, I leave that for the relevant actors to investigate into this. So I'm saying that it should not just stop at designing very good, brilliant paperwork and policy framework. Implementation is key. Do we ensure that this implementation are rightly done, let me leave the government aspect. There's a need for researchers to come up with innovation. I just mentioned it earlier when I was talking about local initiatives that reflect local ingenuity to solving local problems, because that is sustainability. Now, I told you of the case of Malaysia. I was very intrigued by that presentation. Well justified from the angle of climate change impacts on agriculture in the local context of Malaysia, and then the solution. And it gave us statistics, farm trials, the adaptive research, and then the small plot adoption research that they did, and before eventually the pilot phase, and then it was upscaled. Give us statistics of farmers' willingness to pay for this technology. We also saw statistics of differences in terms of yield when you compare with what farmers were doing before and then when they applied this new technology. And I was enthused. We need more groundbreaking researches like that, research works like that in our own environment too. Of course, researchers need to be empowered. We have research institutes. We have a number of them. In fact, more in the southwestern part of Nigeria, but we are not seeing much. Well, they have their own challenges, but I think we need to rise above our challenges if we want to make our nation to be great. Government need to do its own parts. Then our people in the research sectors need to do their parts. There must be diversified livelihoods. Of course, farmers need to be empowered, especially the vulnerables, the women, the young people. They need to be empowered, especially those who are into small-scale production, farming activities. There are alternative livelihoods that can complement what they are doing. So there's a need to train them. I remember one of the ideals of the Red Plus project when it was implemented in the Cross River State was to actually empower women and young people in the forest communities in Cross River, because they were actually constrained from going into the forest to plunder and to tap into forest resources. And they recognize that, of course, their livelihoods are intertwined with these forest resources, but we need the forests to be maintained so that we can have assurance of something sequestering carbon, removing carbon for us. So in order to stop them, they have to be compensated by way of carbon credits. Well, carbon credit never got to most of them in my own interview, but another strategy was to empower them, to give them other alternative livelihoods, so that when they have something else they can do, then they can fall into those things. And then, so in this case, our farmers need to be empowered beyond production, primary production, beyond processing. What other things can they do within the resources available in their context, in their environment, so that, of course, this will minimize the impact of climate change as we make efforts towards improving on our adaptation. In the meantime, they need immediate cushion. And then this immediate cushion can come in the form of what? Empowerment in other areas of livelihoods that they can tap into to augment, household income. Apart from that, technologies. We need technologies that can, climate smart practices generally, climate smart agriculture. Climate change is here. We need to learn how to adapt. One of the key strategies of adaptation is to imbibe or adopt climate smart farming. There are technologies that can make farming more easier. For instance, that can help us to adapt. One of the problems of climate change is drought, prolonged dry spell. So we need technologies that can reduce water usage. Smart irrigation, for instance, is an example. Okay, we need seeds or seedlings that are drought tolerant, that can do well even though there is dry spell. So these are climate smart technologies, that can improve, optimize inputs, that can help farmers to optimize inputs, that can improve the efficiency of the production process and minimize the adverse effect of climate change on their farming livelihoods. These are things that we need to begin to put in place on the immediate. And like I also said earlier, we also need government to begin to look at funding adaptations, not necessarily from the climate funds or finance that is being invested from global north countries. They should begin to look at, how governments in our own environment can also set aside some local funds to support and encourage adaptation, apart from subsidies for certain inputs, and then apart from empowering the vulnerables, then there's also need for setting aside some funds to encourage local adaptation. If all these are done, of course, there are a number of variables. You know that in regression analysis, when you run regression analysis is essentially to test the contributory percentages of a lot of variables to a particular dependent variable. So now there can be a lot of things to do, but I think these are major ones that if these ones are addressed, this carries the bulk of contributory percentages to balancing there are a few other things that can be added later. But if government addresses all these issues frontally, we can be sure that we are on the right trajectory towards coping well with climate change impacts and helping our farmers to survive even in the face of these harsh effects of climate change.
Thank you so much for that. I really like that you came to to the head of the farmers here. They need government to help them cushion the effect of climate change, assisting them with insurance. We need more of micro insurance here. What I saw was that when we had this severe drought, and another instance that wasn't from climate change itself, opening of dam in Cameroon, and it destroyed a lot of a lot of harvest, and farmers, they lost about 100 billion naira worth of farming investment. So they weren't supported adequately and appropriately. And what we see here is a cobweb phenomenon, a cyclical phenomenon, whereby once farmers do not see that they are supported when they have issues, they sort of get demotivated, they lose interest. So there's this supply gap, and it ends up affecting our production and the price of food in the market. So we need government and leadership that can see beyond just the immediate events. You can see the future effect of what is happening immediately. And I also like that you mentioned that, and beyond just farming itself, we should support farmers to have other creative income generating activities that help them cushion some of the effect that we are seeing. Because if they are not able to farm, then they are able to do other things. And I trust that the rural farmers, they have this kind of mixed engagement. They are into one thing or the other, farming, go-smith, and just doing different things. And I also go in line with what you mentioned, that the subsidies to go to the real farmers. We are seeing a lot of political farmers that have nothing to do with farming themselves. At the end of the day, they get this fertilizer, the chemicals and all that, and they sell it. The farmers that are meant to use it are not able to use it. Then it doesn't impact positively their livelihood. And I also like that you mentioned that beyond looking at international funds, and also we should look at domestic fund. Domestic fund, it helps up against this kind of international pressure. You are able to stay off political agenda, and you're able to direct actions and narratives to your own favor. I would go on to ask the last question of the day. This question is really paramount regarding the state of leadership in the world today. I want us to look more into it, looking at the global leadership for climate change mitigation. With the recent change in the seat of power at the highest level, I'll talk about the new US presidency and direction of things with the emergence of President Donald Trump. In 2019, Donald Trump canceled his trip to Davos to World Economic Forum, and had past harsh remarks on climate change causes, saying that let us beware of these so-called fortune tellers. So now I'm asking that, now that he's back at the seat of power and tending to favor industrialization and space exploration, regarding the ambition of Elon Musk for humanity to have colony at Mars, yeah, that is going to end up, sending a lot of space rocket, generating several emissions, yeah. So I'm looking at it that, do you think this could roll back the, progressing with combating climate change? And what do you think this means for the world? Was this a point of discussion at the COP29? Could you furnish us briefly with, with this, help us imagine what the future is going to be like with this new leadership? Thank you.
That's a very big question. That was a big question. Very interesting question, though, because I remember that some of my colleagues who are based in the US, especially those who are US citizens, in the wake of our plannings for the COP, in fact, a few days to the commencement of the COP event, the announcement declaring Donald Trump as the winner of the US election, came to the forefront of global discourse. And then some of my friends and then colleagues who are US citizens, some of them actually broke down in tears, especially for those who are, proponents of climate change. We fight against climate change, humanity's fight against climate change. They got a lot disappointed by the emergence of Donald Trump as the US president, because they felt that his earlier position, will still be maintained. And then they were trying to look at what far-reaching impact that could have in the global fight against climate change, given that US, though just a country among about 174 countries that are part of the COP, that, play key roles in undersigning major agreements at COP. But, one country that has a lot of weight and has got a lot of influence. Be that as it may, I think that the world managed to cope. Even when Trump was the president, he was once the president of US for 4 years. And during those 4 years, he did not show much support for COP events because he, like you said, he came out one time to describe climate change as a hoax. He never believed in it. And then there were even measures to cut down climate financing coming from the United States of America. Nevertheless, the world moved. America is just one out of the 174 partnering countries that undersigned to the Paris Agreement and the rest. I don't think, of course, it's going to be a major drawback, but together with other countries, we can advance and we can move forward. We can achieve our targets, So I think that the US, and then also to let you know that he's in power just for 4 years. 4 years, will soon pass over, will soon pass away. And then hopefully there's going to be another person in the office. He's just one of the minority who don't believe in climate change. And then, of course, change is the only thing that is very constant. We expect that even within these next 4 years, Donald Trump might have reasons to change his position about climate change. I have information from some reliable quarters that he was actually misled at that time, that he is somebody that listened a lot to some of his advisors. And then you cannot, rule out the possibility of political issues. He's got a lot of friends, he's got a lot of enemies also. And then if your enemy is at the forefront of a particular agenda, even though you might not have disbelief in that agenda, but you can come out publicly to discountenance that agenda because it is being championed by somebody you don't like or somebody that doesn't like you. I suspect that some of those things were perhaps reasons behind Donald Trump's, actions during his first tenure as the president of the United States of America. I see more political issue to his outburst and then to his, stance on climate change than the reality. And I want to be optimistic that we are likely going to see a different Donald Trump. You see that throughout his last campaign, He actually avoided talking about climate change. I didn't hear anyway from some of his campaigns that I followed. And I saw a deliberate attempt to avoid talking about it. So that means that sends a signal that he's probably, winding down on it, or he would just like to maintain a neutral position, not causing any further damage. And so I see the tide turning. I foresee that the tides will turn. But even if it doesn't, Donald Trump is just one. And then there are quite a number of multinationals in the US. If the government refused to finance, there are quite a number of agencies and other, who are ready to, continue to support and put more money to support adaptation in global south countries. So we are going to, the world will move on, and then achieving the targets of net zero. Though I've said earlier that we need to look at the time frame and reconsider, elongating it so as to give more time, particularly for countries that are still struggling to be able to get themselves on board and strategize well, master their strategy to adapt. We will still achieve our goals without Donald Trump, with or without Donald Trump. So that is my belief. And you see, a lot of Americans are actually heartbroken, at least the ones I know who are in the forefront of the crusade, against climate change impacts. They are heavily disappointed that Trump, and singularly because of Trump's position against climate change. And I know that many of them are not also resting on their horse. Now that it is, the reality that is the president of the US, the next agenda will be how do we broker, meetings. I foresee he's not going to take that hard line. And then even if he does that, the fight against climate change is a global fight. Globally, we have many countries. We have more than the US alone. US alone is not going to draw us back. And I know that even it's not the whole of the United States of America that is actually standing with Donald Trump on this matter. US has got a number of states. They have governors who are independent. The way their own structure or the country, the landscape of the country is managed or is run, the constitution is different from our own Nigeria, where everything is, dictated or controlled from the central government. In America, most of the states or provinces enjoy relative, how do I call it now, independence to take decisions. They have their own laws that governs each of the states. And then I think that also means that we are not likely going to have major drawbacks because of the central government in the US not supporting global climate agenda. If we have many other state governors that are behind the global climate agenda, I think the world will be fine. And indeed, we are going to be fine. That's my take on that.
Thank you so much for that. I like that you are being optimistic and mentioning that the fight against global climate change is not a fight of one person, is a fight of the world, a fight of legion. And if one person in minority is saying no, then we have other people. And if a country is restricting funds, it is indeed one of the key feature of a democratic society, whereby one person did not necessarily have a say on how the affairs of the country or society is going to be run, but we have some checks and balances in place. These are some of the things that are missing in some democracies in some part of the world, talking from the developing world here. And this is one of the things that we can actually incorporate in our own, country, in effecting the needed change that we desire, to see. So we are coming to the end of the event here, and very shortly I'm going to leave you to give us the final advice, that you like for us to, take, whether as an individual getting onto the cause against climate change, and also what you think the government should do, and some other key stakeholders here. So I'll just quickly run up the whole event shortly for people that are just joining us or they join us in part and we're in private to the previous conversation that we've been having. So we basically been talking about climate change and the relevance to Africa and its food system, looking at the COP29 Reflection Climate Change Conference. So we are trying to see how this impacts Africa, the role of Africa, and we've been able to establish that climate change issue is not like we see on the surface, is politicized, and although it's politicized, but politics, like I'll use the words of our professor today, is a normal phenomenon of humans. We are meant to, that's how we influence decision here. But politics should be the bare minimum, like he said. And is saying that lives are being invaded, properties, livelihood by the violent episode of climate change. And just because beneficiary countries that are so-called have this kind of fragile democracy, they are vulnerable just because they don't have the required technical capacity, to make use of the disbursed fund, doesn't mean that we wouldn't still give them the funds. And it's saying that the allocated funds, there should not be disparity between the allocated fund and the disbursed fund. Since we have some other, key tools of democracy effecting the necessary change, then we can channel those funds to them. We are talking about the organization and so many multilateral organizations. Yeah. So that's what we are saying. And he did mention the importance of domestic finance, in combating climate change. We don't have to wait for international organization. It helps to set the narratives straight and help you to have a backbone in, fighting your own battle here. And he did mention that we have to support farmers and their farming system and their livelihood, helping them with subsidy and making sure that it goes to the right farmers, and also supporting them to have alternative, livelihoods as well. And he mentioned some of the key changes that we would like to see on an international level from the COP29, and we arrive at talking about some of the immediate and long-term strategies that we could establish, irrespective of whether what the kind of leadership that we are seeing in our respective country isn't as it should be to, bring about the necessary changes. Yeah, he talked about how we actually address the current leadership of the United States and the impact on the global climate change fight. And he's very optimistic about that, since it's a open democracy world, so there's always checks and balances. So I would leave it to that, and I'd like to remind you that this event is brought to you by the Las Gidi Farmer podcast. It's being recorded. If you are not privy to the previous discussion that we've had on this, you can actually have them in the recorded version and you'll be able to listen to them fully. So do not worry. So I'm going to yield the mic to Professor Olushola Fadairo to leave us with the remarkable and lasting remarks of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like to start first and foremost by appreciating Las Gidi Farmer for giving me this platform. Yes, it's a very good platform for me to interact and then to give feedback to my constituents, or constituency, about my understanding and my experience at COP. And I'm doing this without paying any dime. So I think I need to appreciate the platform you have provided. And if you also permit me, my going to COP was actually partly sponsored by international bodies. There are quite a number of organizations that partnered to support a program that is called CCOP, Christian Climate Observers Program. They were actually responsible for, part sponsorship for me to attend the COP29. And I think that I owe, a lot. I need to appreciate CCCOP for this privilege. And then finally, I like to say that the COP conference of the parties, is a very important annual meeting for addressing global climate change, because it serves as the primary international forum for governments, for scientists, and for other stakeholders to work together to combat the climate crisis. Note that I said that not just government alone, scientists, but I think that a number of scientists are not participating, especially from our own hands. I didn't see much of our scientists participate in these events. Of course, many of them are not finding sponsorship. So my advice to scientists is to ensure that, especially those who are into climate change stuff, those who are into environment and sustainability specialties, we need to see more of them come to COP and then contribute to discussions and debates, then learn and then be challenged. I tell you, if you attend COP and then you are actually careful enough to follow most of the events, you will return refreshed, bubbling with a lot of ideas, and then you will not remain the same. If you have critical mass of our stakeholders attend this event, we are better positioned to engineer change in our local context. So I want to encourage our scientists. You can invest, I invested a lot of personal funds, committed it to, worthwhile events. And then fiduciaries issue, talked about fiduciary standards. Yeah, actually, global north countries are not completely wrong about the weak governance capacity and our inability to meet up with fiduciary standards that is actually causing a wide gap between funds allocated and funds disbursed. So this goes to our policy actors. We need to strengthen our system. We need to plug and block loopholes. We need to be committed to transparency. I know that there are political issues beyond the fiduciary standards or behind the fiduciary standards, but if we actually do our own part also, and then we demonstrate genuine commitment and transparency, we are likely going to have more funds disbursed. And then, the import and the implications of that on the rural people, on promoting adaptation, and in encouraging transition from fossil to renewable energy. So our governments need to wake up. We need to strengthen our system. We need to give more capacity. There are, a number of persons that are sent to COP as delegates. There are a number of them. Some of them are just there as tourists. We need to get more people who are serious-minded. I heard from some quarters on the COP ground, those who are actually behind, the negotiators from Africa, giving useful advice and information to them. They asked me, Nigeria, we are not feeling Nigeria at all. He said in most events at COP, is that not just this year, but even in previous years, many countries in Africa look forward, they look up to Nigeria. But he said Nigeria is not doing anything, Nigeria is nowhere. That was a very sad news and information for me. And personally, a few things I saw, even on the COP grant, tells us that we need to do more. Our delegates need to be more prepared, need to be more strengthened. We need to send delegates with the requisite, capacity to engage in negotiations. We need to do something so that we will not just turn these COP events to another opportunity to help our political loyalists to get extra code, to travel and see what is happening and enjoy life. We need to send people who are more serious, who are business-minded, and then who have passion to see that this climate crisis is brought to an end. Then we need to also ensure that we demonstrate transparency. The funds that we have, the ones we are able to allocate, let's spend more of the fund, the bulk of the fund, in promoting actual adaptation and reduce, the percentage we allocate for overheads, buying jeeps, buying all those stuff. I think that it doesn't show that we are very much serious People are dying at rural community levels. People need to be supported. They are at the back end of the climate crisis. They need to be supported. So we should ensure that what is right is done. The fund that is meant to promote adaptation is totally committed to adaptation costs and not for some other activities that have no direct bearing with supporting people at the local levels. These are just a few of my reflections and then my concluding thoughts for all of us. I hope that by 2050, even if we are unable to meet the net zero targets, we would have hinged so close to it. Even if we are going to expand the time frame, it will just be a bonus to wrap up so that all of us can collectively be proud that we won the battle against climate change and that we are giving to our future generation a climate that is good enough for their living, that will not hinder them from achieving their goals, and that they will be proud that we fought the battle and we didn't pass it on to them to struggle. We cleaned the mess for them. And every one of us have got roles to play, even at individual levels. At individual levels, at household levels, let us ensure that we do what is right, what helps our climate to be cleaner. We have to take a lot of decisions, but let us decide our rights. Let us think sustainability. There is this framework of circular economy. It has 9 R's: reuse, recycle, refuse, all those stuff. Let us apply them even at household level. By so doing, collectively, we will be contributing to reducing global greenhouse gas emissions and ensuring that we have a cleaner climate and green economy. Thank you so very much for this platform once again.
Thank you so much, Professor Olushola Fadairo. It's been really interesting, brilliant session, I must say. I feel really enlightened and refreshed about the whole climate change, landscape, expanding my view on some of the things that I never knew, helping to solidify my knowledge as well. I really appreciate you for coming. And I say a big thank you on behalf of the audience that have been listening to us, live and anonymously. We say a big thank you. We look forward to having you on the show from time to time on some other, pertinent issues. And I was even thinking if there could be a way whereby beyond just this COP29 event, there is an extension of physical strategies, measure that could be established. I don't know if you will be willing to lead the course, and we have some key stakeholders that are interested in this kind of initiative that can actually push it. Yeah, so we know that beyond just discussion, we are making real life impact on the ground, in the lives of the farmers, in the lives of the rural people, and in the lives of the Nigerian and African people. And so to that, to the audience listening, is highlighted some of the things that are required, for us to move the spoon of climate change. Talking about the need for dedication to more researches, and this goes to our government, supporting researches, providing funds, and to be able to send the fit people to these conferences, to learn and come back and help us with some of these things, locally adapt global best practices, right? And also as an individual, we are a researcher. I did mention that is going to the COP29 event was actually partly funded, used his fund because he knew what exactly and the immense value you'll be receiving from attending such event. And this is one of it that we are having here, because if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be able to be having this kind of robust discussion this evening, right? So he did mention that, and please let's take all these things to consideration, with that we can have a unified and collaborative effort to mitigate and adapt to the challenges of climate change. I'm once again the last giddy farmer. I thank you so much for joining me and Professor Shola Fadairo on this particular episode of the podcast. We look forward to having you next time. Do have a lovely night rest. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the honor and the platform. Thanks to all our audience. I'm so grateful.